Okay, guys, Panzer J back, and we've come to the conclusion of Operation Live and Let Die. It has ended in a Comintern victory. So, um, I'll add up the victory points here in a couple of minutes and kind of just review the game, some of the highlights and the lowlights for the Axis. Before I get into that, I just want to say a couple of things. First, a great game from both of my opponents, Fighting Irish and Global War 36 Enthusiast. If any of you guys are watching, thinking about putting together a game and having a YouTube war, I suggest you reach out to both of those gentlemen. They're both worthy opponents, have kept me on my toes throughout the game, threw a bunch of surprises my way, tried to react as best I could, and give them a little bit of fight in return. And if you've been keeping up with their videos, I hope you have been, you know that they fought right to the very end. Fighting Irish on his last U.S. turn here was attacking all across the board, attacking everybody from the Pacific to Europe and the Atlantic. So definitely tip my hats to both of those guys. I would not hesitate to play another game with them. Would love a rematch. Whether we switched up sides or kept things as they were, would definitely love another chance. Then as far as what I hope to accomplish in this game, especially even starting my YouTube channel, it wasn't to try to become any kind of YouTube sensation or to have X number of subscribers or anything like that, although I appreciate every subscriber I have and you guys watching the videos and all of the positive comments, constructive criticism, all that is definitely welcome. But I started my channel just simply to make contacts in the community. You know, I had for a while been watching videos of some of the more prolific YouTubers out there like General Hand Grenade and Young Grasshopper, Panzer King, Admiral Seabass, Hilltop Pillbox, just to name a few. And not only did I really enjoy their videos, but I was hoping to make contact with guys like that to do things like these YouTube wars. And mission accomplished in that regard. So I definitely feel like I have gotten everything I could and everything I wanted to out of creating this YouTube channel and doing these videos. So I definitely appreciate that and look forward to future games here, future YouTube wars. So on to the victory condition. So for the victory objectives, obviously each country has a set of conditions that they can score victory points off of. But then also, if you look over under the victory objectives, there's a couple of extra things. So first is objective cities. So those cities are Berlin, Tokyo, Rome, London, Calcutta, Sydney, Paris, Washington, Nanking, and Moscow. And they're each worth $1, or each worth a point, I should say. And then also, though, a nation will lose 1 victory point for each land zone worth at least 1 IPP in its home country that is enemy possessed. So, and a nation that has surrendered can't score any victory points. So keep that in mind. So you get points for objective cities, and you lose 1 point for each land zone in your home country that has an IPP value that is under enemy occupation. So let's go. We'll do the Axis first. We didn't do as good as we had hoped, but let's take a look. So for Germany under Lebensraum, they can get a maximum of 4. And there's 5 different land groupings, and they can get a maximum, again, of 4 of those 5 points there. So the first one, Warsaw, West Poland, and I will not try to pronounce that one. We do have all 3 of those, so that's 1 point. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, we had that, but under our secret agreement, although it turned out to be not so secret with the Russians. We gave those up. We do have Denmark, Netherlands, and Belgium, so that's 2 points. Yugoslavia and this Greek territory that starts with a T. We had that until right at the end of the game here. Fighting Irish came in and took that Greek territory from us. That denied us that victory point. And then we never even made our way into Russia, so southern Ukraine, western Ukraine, and Belarus, definitely not. So we got 2 of the 4 for Lebensraum. Eliminate communism, 1 victory objective for Germany possessing Moscow or 2 other cities, no. Gain resources, score 1 victory objective, German income from land zone and bonuses is plus 50. We're at 60 minus bonuses, so we got that. That's 3. And then the Spanish Civil War, we did win that, so we get 1 for that. So that's 4. So 4 of the 7 for the objective for Germany. But then we also have Berlin, an objective city, so that's 5. And we also have Paris, so that's 6. So by my calculations, Germany has scored 6 victory points, and they have no land masses in their home country that are enemy occupied, not only at this point, but at any time in the game, actually. So Germany should have 6 points. Now on to the Italians. Expand the empire. Score 1 victory objective for each new land zone Italy possesses at the end of the game they did not possess at the start. So that's regardless of value. So I know Fighting Irish had a question about Albania, but he has that as German controlled. I had it as Italian, but regardless, Italy has 3 territories in North Africa. So they definitely get their 2 points there. Mediterranean dominance. They do not have twice the capital ships. I did put 2 capital ships down this last Italian turn, but Fighting Irish came in and completely wiped them out. And I don't even think I even inflicted 1 casualty. So it was pretty much a slaughter. So we do not get that. Triumph of fascism, score 1 victory objective to Nationalist 1. So again, like Germany, we get that. So Italy is currently at 3. And they have Rome, of course. So that is 4. But then they have... Now, Sicily isn't worth anything, so they don't lose anything for Sicily, but this southern Italian territory does have an IPP value. It's, again, Fighting Irish took that right on the last turn, so that knocks Italy down 1, so it's a net gain of Italy for 3. So I should be at 9 right now for Italy and Germany. Now on to Japan. Colonialism, scored 2 objectives. Our victory objectives as Japan is over 50, including bonuses. We're nowhere near that. Pacific security, score 1 victory objective for 3 of the following. I'm not even sure. I know we don't have Hawaii, Marshall, Caroline, Wake, Midway, so we might only even have 1. Or twice the number of capital ships. We have no capital ships, so forget that one. Raw materials, score 1 victory objective for each of the following. The only one Japan has is Java, so that's 1. And then they have Tokyo, of course, so that's 2. But then this northern Japanese territory, Hokkaido, is under U.S. occupation. So 1 for the Japanese. So by my calculations, the Axis have 10 victory points. 6 for Germany, 3 for Italy, and 1 for Japan. Now on to the Allies. We'll do them next. So let's see. For the British, contain communism. Score 1 victory objective if the USSR has no land units in the following territories. I'm not going to name all those off, but they do get that, so that's 1. Maintain the empire. They need to be in control of South Africa, Eastern Egypt, and Aden. That is, they do, so that's 2. Contain fascism. Germany's way over there, 24, so that one they don't get. And Mediterranean security, they do have Malta, Eastern Egypt, and Gibraltar, but they also must have twice as many capital ships as the Axis and the Med, and they actually do not have any capital ships on the board at all. So that's 3 that's 2 for the British, maintain the empire and contain communism. They get 1 for London, which is still in English control, so that's 3. But then the Germans have 3 territories in England that have an IPP value: the Midlands, Northern England, and Scotland. So that wipes out the 3 the British have, so they're at 0. Okay. As far as the FEC, FEC is pretty much completely wiped out. Calcutta, they don't get anything for that. That's enemy occupied, and they definitely have not preserved the empire. So nothing for the FEC. Anzac, no surface enemy warships within 2 sea zones of Australia. They do have that, and they also have Sydney. So Australia's actually got 2. The U.S., Monroe Doctrine, there were Soviet units in the United States, so they don't get that. They have not contained fascism. They have not contained communism. They do have Pacific security, because they do have twice as many ships as the Japanese. Maintain the empire. They do currently possess all of their original land zones. And technological superiority, they never got, what was it? There was at least one of these they did not succeed in getting. I can't remember offhand. But, strategic rockets they didn't get. So that's 2, plus Washington, D.C. is 3. So that's 3 for the U.S., 2 for Anzac so far. Free French, or France. They don't have Paris, so let's take that off the board here. They did not disarm Germany. They have eliminated communism, so that's 1. And then they have not maintained their empire. They do not possess all their original territory. So 1 for France. So that's up to 6 altogether for the Allies. And the KMT, there are non-Chinese land zones in continental China. They do not own Nanking. They are not in possession of 2 of those following land masses, and there are CCP units in Chinese home country. So they get none for the KMT. So that should altogether be 6 for the Allies, 2 Anzac, 3 U.S., 1 France. So, and then let's move on to the winner of the game, which is Global War 36 Enthusiast. So for buffer zone, they do own all of those territories. That's 1. 1 point for each landmass worth an IPP that they did not possess at the beginning of the turn or the beginning of the game. I'm not going to count all of them, but you can see all of those roundels on the board for the Russians. So I'm confident, without going through each and every one, that they've got their 11. So that's 12. Eastern security, they can trace a supply path using railroads. Ice-free port, they have Crimea and Istanbul, so they're good there. Technological superiority, they did not get long-range aircraft, so they don't get that. So that's 2, 3, 14, plus they also have Moscow as 15, and they have Calcutta as 16. So I believe the Russians are at 16. For the CCP, there are non-Chinese units, so they don't get that one. And the CCP does have more land units than the KMT, so they get the 2 for that. Plus, they also own Nanking, so that's 3. So it should be 19 for the Comintern. So if my math is correct, it is the final score is Comintern 19, Axis 10, Allies 6. So, and old Fighting Irish fought to the end. He deprived me of a couple of victory points right at the end there. So I was at 12 before the U.S. went. So obviously it wouldn't have made a difference. But so now on to a little bit of a review. As far as the Axis go, let's start over here in Europe. So I had mentioned, I think in my either pre-war video or maybe it was Germany's first turn, without giving away really any strategies overall, that I wanted to use cooperation among each of the three Axis powers. I didn't want them kind of going off and doing their own thing, even if it was beneficial to that particular country. If it didn't benefit the Axis as a whole, I didn't see much use in doing it, because obviously my goal was to win the game. So I tried to, whether it was Germany, Italy, or Japan, I tried to make sure that not only their actions benefited themselves, but that it furthered the Axis cause in general. So with that in mind, for Germany, my pre-war strategy was that I wanted to use, when I did use the German blitzkrieg move, I wanted to be able to take out France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Poland all on that same turn. So I was positioning units with my purchases and just in terms of non-combat movements leading up to that turn to accomplish that. So I was able to go in, I believe it was in January 1940, if I'm not mistaken, that I did the blitzkrieg turn. And I accomplished what I wanted to. So I took all of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and took out Warsaw, took down the Poles. So mission accomplished there. And my buys leading up to that, I was going heavy into obviously ground units. I don't think I really bought almost anything in the way of naval or air force. I bought a bunch of self-propelled artillery to be able to pair with my medium armor once I was able to start purchasing them to go into France. And then I used a bunch of infantry and cavalry in Warsaw and Poland. So that went well. And then I had planned to annex the three countries in the Balkans, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And then at that point, I really didn't have any designs on the British, honestly, or Sea Lion. I planned on taking a more historical route and doing Barbarossa and going into the Soviet Union. But it didn't turn out that way. But that was my original plan with the Germans. I was going to produce just enough Navy to convoy the British and give the Allies something to think about in the Atlantic. But I wanted to turn on the Russians once I had taken all the territories in Western Europe and annexed all my territories down in the Balkans. I was going to go after the Russians. But that was forestalled by my opponents. Unbeknownst to me, they had concluded a pact prior to the start of the game, and definitely give these guys all kinds of props. I'm not even sure exactly what the details of the agreement were, but at least in terms of how it affected the Germans, the Russians came in and attacked Romania before I could annex, or not annex, I shouldn't say annex, I should say align, before I could align the Romanians, and that was a big hit to me. Not only is Romania worth 3 IPP, but Germany gets a 3 IP bonus for it, so it's basically $6 a turn for Romania. Plus, there's a bunch of units in Romania. There's a fighter, and I'm 5 or 6 infantry, so there's a bunch of units. So that was a huge blow to lose Romania before I could align it. So that kind of set me back in terms of my plans to go into Russia. So because I was going to use, obviously, not only Romania as a staging area as part of the attack into Russia, but I wanted to incorporate all those Romanian forces into my own. So that was kind of the first instance in the game, at least in terms of playing Germany, where I had to kind of rethink things and do things a little differently. Let me backtrack just a minute as far as the Spanish Civil War goes. That's another thing that I guess I kind of had to rethink a little bit as the game went on. I didn't want to send so much to the Spanish Civil War, both with Germany and especially Italy, because they just don't have the income. But Global War 36 put up such a strong defense that it sucked a lot of German and Italian resources. I did end up winning, obviously, and that was worth 2 victory points, so I guess I can't complain, but I would actually prefer to spend less in Spain if possible, but it didn't turn out to be that way. So then back to Germany. Once, Russia kind of was a little bit more aggressive than I thought they were going to be, I then had to transition to, okay, well, is Barbarossa really feasible? Global War 36 enthusiast saved up all his money for several turns, then just dropped down a bunch of militia and infantry. Now, obviously, I had higher attack and defense units on the Eastern Front at that point, like medium armor and fighters and things like that, but he would have just been able to absorb so many hits with all those militia he put down that it just didn't make any sense to go into Russia, especially when I still had, Britain putting up a fight and the U.S. getting into the war early. So once the alliance between the Comintern and the Allies broke down and Global War 36 enthusiasts approached me about a truce, I really had no choice but to jump on that, especially with what was happening with Japan in the Pacific. If I would have turned down Global War 36 enthusiast and kind of just went on my own still, I don't think things would have turned out as well for me. I couldn't have survived, I don't think, fighting everybody with the way the game had been going up to that point. So I had to, take his offer, and it was very generous. I think we worked well together. We kept the truce for the rest of the remaining of the game, and I knew many turns ago that he was going to end up winning, but again, there wasn't much I could do about it. Fighting Irish and I never even discussed any kind of truce or alliance. We actually still fought each other to the very end, as you saw from his video. So most of my effort and most of his effort were directed against each other. So that allowed Global War 36 enthusiasts to kind of not necessarily sit back, but the Russians really had no danger of invasion whatsoever and were able to just go on the offensive all over the place. So, but again, I kind of felt like that was my only option at that point. But overall, I'm happy with Germany. They finished with the 60 IPP plus bonuses. They have all of England except for London. They have Ireland, all of Western Europe. They're all the way to the border with the Russians in the east. They never lost, even for a turn, any original territory. And in France, the Allies were never in a position to mount an invasion. So that territory in France, once it fell to Germany in the Blitzkrieg turn, it stayed German for the rest of the game. So I'm fairly happy with the way I played Germany. I would have liked to have taken London, and that's what I was kind of obviously gearing up for. But once I saw Fighting Irish just pouring all kinds of units in there, and it would have been a bloodbath, I transitioned to, well, if I can't take London, I at least don't want to lose these territories in England and give him back these victory points. So that's when I went ahead and built the fortification and just then kind of stayed on the defensive. Used my planes that I had based in the Midlands to pick off ships and to scramble from that airfield. So also, I was going to, if the game would have went several turns, it would have taken at least 2 or 3 more turns, which is possible. But I was thinking about building some more naval transports. I was going to bring my Air Force back to the Midlands, and then I was going to use these carriers and then some transports and maybe come over and even land in Canada. Before Fighting Irish had taken out my fleet in the Channel, I had a major port there. I could have went 1, 2, 3, and on one turn landed in Labrador. So I was actually thinking about doing that. But between him coming in and attacking my fleet in the channel and obviously us ending the game, that didn't happen. But that was a possibility down the road for Germany as well. Also, I was thinking about buying some more transports, flying them down to Africa, getting these paratroopers, and eventually possibly coming over and landing paratroopers in Brazil and to be in South America, which I think would have been kind of cool to be able to say as the Germans that I landed or took possession of some territories in South America. As far as the Italians go, now things don't look so good right now for Italy, but again, ending the war when we did, I think Italy's actually in better shape than it kind of looks right now. They're only at $8, and there's a bunch of Allied ships in the Med, but no capital ships minus the one U.S. Carrier. I do have territory in Northern Africa, and between the German and Italian Air Force, I think I would have been able to clear out these ships and then get some capital ships in the water for the Italians, possibly start bringing some units over into Africa. I would have had to deal with this pretty big English force in Cairo, but it only can move one space a turn, so it would have taken him quite a while to get to me. By then, I would have definitely gotten control of the Mediterranean in terms of both naval and air units. So, but Italy itself, Rome was never in any danger. I did lose a couple of Italian territories, but again, this one here in the boot, that was just taken here just like, on this last turn. So, I mean, that I obviously would have expelled that U.S. infantry. So, I don't even really count that as so much having lost that. It's not like that would have been retained by the United States. So for the most part, Italy really wasn't any danger in Italian home territories. I did lose Sardinia, but that's an island, so not part of the land mass of Italy itself. So I like what I did with Italy. I wanted to obviously build up a navy, but then between the resources I sent to the Spanish in the Civil War and the fact that, the Allies had quite a few ships. The U.S. was in the Med for most of the game, and they got in so early that I then transitioned from, I'm not going to spend all this money on naval units that are just going to get sunk anyways. Let me invest mostly in an air force. And that way, especially once I got long-range aircraft, I could, roam the Mediterranean, hit anywhere in North Africa I wanted to, pick off Allied ships, use paratroopers as part of an effort to get some territories back that I might have lost, and just be really versatile as far as being able to hit anywhere in the Med, knowing that the Allies can't cover everything. So I thought I had a fairly large Italian Air Force for most of the game. I know some people, I've seen some of the YouTube wars where Italy doesn't get into the game at all, and you can definitely accomplish your victory points as Italy without coming into the war. I see the logic behind, keeping Italy out and just getting your 4 or 5 potential victory points. But to me, it's not really a lot of fun to just have Italy sit on the sidelines. Now, if you tell me the U.S. is sitting here in Sea Zone 50 with 10 transports, 20 Marines, and 10 jets fighters ready to invade Rome if Italy comes into the war, then clearly I'm not going to bring Italy into the war. But barring something like that, I can tell my future opponents that as long as I'm playing Italy, they're going to come into the war every game. Again, it's just not any fun for me to just sit on the sidelines and just think if you can, with the Italians, not necessarily make them a juggernaut, but have them at the end of the game gaining victory points, having fought the whole war. It just is that much more of a sense of accomplishment, I think, as Italy, that you were able to do that and fight off the Allies. And again, I did it. Rome didn't fall. Italy has gotten 3 victory points. It really should have been 4, minus this one right here at the end. So I just like what I've done with the Italians overall. It did take a lot of German help for sure, but Germany was in a position to lend help with the truce with the Comintern. Again, Germany was never in any danger of an invasion in Western Europe or losing any original territory, so they did have the resources to send to the Italians, and they sent a bunch of air units down with paratroopers, and I think Italy overall did pretty good. I would rather, as the Italians, bring them into the war and potentially lose than have them sit on the sidelines the whole game and get their victory points. That's just me. Now on to the Achilles heel of the Axis in this game, and it was the Japanese. I had such high hopes for the Japanese at the start of the game, and I thought for about the first 7 turns, something like that, things went really well. I know a lot of people had some criticism for me not going into China, and I let the CCP kind of become a juggernaut. The problem with that was that I obviously didn't know of the pre-war agreement between Fighting Irish and Global War 36 enthusiasts. So they decided to divide up China amongst themselves and not fight each other. What I was hoping for as the Japanese was that they would beat each other up. Their forces would be ground down, and that I could kind of go in, down the road and clean up the leftovers. Well, that didn't happen because, again, they decided to just trade territories and not fight each other until towards the end of the game, by that point it was too late. So I was going to stay out of China, which I did, and my whole strategy was a South Pacific strategy. I was going for the Money Islands, and then I wanted to be in a position to go to Calcutta next. That was the overall strategy as the Japanese. Come down, take the Money Islands, and then pivot right over to Calcutta. So for those first 6 turns or so, I bought a bunch of Marines. I think by the time I brought Japan into war, they had about 10 or 12 Marines. They had a bunch of other ground units that were being transported on a bunch of naval transports. I bought destroyers so they could take one ground unit, one infantry class unit. I had a huge air force, obviously a huge navy. And that was what the kind of pre-war strategy was for the Japanese. And again, it was part of helping the Axis overall. Like, let's just play out for a second that my strategy would have worked, and we'll talk about in a minute why it didn't. So you come down here and you take all the Money Islands, which obviously is a big boost both for the territories themselves and the bonuses. But now, if I could then pivot from the South Pacific here, the Money Islands, over to Calcutta, take out the FEC, I believe that prior to the U.S. entering the conflict, the FEC is Japan's biggest enemy. They have the most naval units. They have potentially the biggest income. So not only are you eliminating the biggest threat to the Japanese prior to the entry of the United States, but look at what you force the British player, the UK player, to do. So he sees this massive Japanese fleet down here taking the Money Islands. Now, he can either bring his naval units that are in the Med off of Cairo, and at that point in the game, maybe he's consolidated from around England, and he could then bring all those ships over to engage the Japanese and try to defend Calcutta, which if he does that, now that opens the entire Med for the Italian Navy and for Italy to get into the game now, because they've drawn away the British units. Or if he stays in the Med to kind of keep an eye on Italy and keep them out of the fight, well, then now that leaves Calcutta as easy pickings for the Japanese. Not only that, but once Calcutta falls, there is nothing in the Indian Ocean to prevent the Japanese from now coming over to Africa. So they can they can take Calcutta and then come on over. They can land all the way down here in South Africa. They can even maybe take Cairo from the Suez here. This portion of the Suez, come in and take Cairo from behind, so to speak. putting all kinds of pressure on the British, which then alleviates the pressure that's on the Italians. So that was my whole thinking. And if it would have worked out that way, I would have still had a bunch of naval transports after taking Calcutta, a handful of Marines, my aircraft carriers with all my planes. I was then going to come over to Africa, land somewhere here, and now force the British to deal with that, all the while allowing Italy to come in and not really have much to deal with in terms of the British, because now they're occupied down here. So that was my overall thinking with the Japanese. It didn't turn out that way, and this is where my unbelievable bad luck, and a bunch of you guys have commented about how horrible the dice roll went for me, and that's definitely not, excusing the fact I didn't win by any means. My opponents played a better game, I believe, but it definitely didn't help. And the first really, kick I took when it came to the die roll, and I hesitate to say that one turn, let alone one die roll, cost the Japanese the game. This game is so long, and there's so many ups and downs and so much ebb and flow that, I hesitate to say that. But I believe it was turn 7, maybe, or turn 8 at the latest. I think turn 7. And that was the turn and the die roll that completely destroyed my hopes for a Japanese empire. So I had come down on the Japanese portion of the turn, and I had taken all the money islands. So my navy was spread out into 4 or 5 different sea zones to assist in these different amphibious landings. And it went well. I didn't take hardly any casualties, took all the money islands. My entire navy was still left. At the time, I can't remember exactly, but there was a couple of battleships, a bunch of heavy cruisers, some subs, some destroyers. I believe I had 2 fleet carriers, maybe like 3 light carriers, obviously a bunch of planes. And I was feeling really good. I accomplished the first part of the Japanese strategy, and things were going good. But then right away on the next portion of the turn, the UK, I think Fighting Irish needed a 9 on a 12-sided die to bring the UK into the fight, and he rolled, I think, a 10, maybe it was. So I was totally not counting on the British. I mean, that was like about a 75-25% chance that he wasn't going to get that roll. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, it's not going to happen. But obviously it did. And what he had done, and I believe he said his son actually controlled the UK, so I got to give his son all kinds of props because he played a great game, and some of his strategies were absolutely killer. They had brought a bunch of British ships down here into the Indian Ocean turns prior to. Now, his fleet was not big enough to take on my entire Japanese fleet, but it was still a very formidable opponent. And when he rolled enough to get the UK into the war that turn, he then attacked my Japanese ships that were dispersed in those 4 or 5 sea zones. So he could pick, what zones to attack that had the fewest ships in it. And he not completely, but I would say he took 60% of my naval units, 60, maybe 75% of my naval units, including like both battleships, several of my carriers. I mean, it was absolutely devastating. I got a bunch of hits on him in return, but he had definitely accomplished what I'm assuming he set out to do, which is just completely degrade the Japanese Navy down here in the South Pacific. He also took out a bunch of my transports. I mean, you see these 4 Marines, they've been in Java since like turn 6 or 7. So, I mean, they've sat there the whole time because he destroyed a bunch of my transports and stranded Marines all over these money islands. So not only was it the loss of the ships, but by losing the transports, the ground units became useless, and they just sat on those islands for the rest of the game until he, in some cases, took those islands back. So that turn, and especially that one die roll, was so devastating. And the thing is, if he would not have gotten that die roll and couldn't bring the UK into the fight that turn, on the next turn for Japan, which would have obviously been before the UK went again, I wasn't going to attack Calcutta yet, but I was going to bring all of those Japanese ships that were dispersed in those 5 sea zones over here to Sumatra in one massive fleet. And there's no way that even if he would have got then the UK in the turn into the game that turn, there's no way he was going to attack that massive Japanese fleet. Or if he did, I would have definitely killed off every ship he had and still had stuff left over. So it was literally that one die roll that just completely shot my Japanese hopes and dreams down the drain. At that point, it was, I mean, and the other thing was how good his die rolls were to get the U.S. into the fight. If I maybe could have recovered as the Japanese if the U.S. hadn't gotten into the war until a normal time frame, but he got the U.S. into the war like 3 or 4 turns early. So it just did not give me enough time to build up a Japanese Navy again to then deal with, at that point, the U.S., the Far East Command, the Australians. I just couldn't do it. Maybe, I maybe could have recovered from all these naval battles in the South Pacific if the U.S. would have stayed out of the war for a while. But with the U.S. into the war so early, it was really just a matter of trying to hold on for the Japanese. There really wasn't anything I could do. I then transitioned to, obviously making sure I held on to Tokyo, which I'm proud of the fact I did that. There was really, little to no danger at all that Tokyo was going to fall. Fighting Irish just did not have the ability to take Tokyo. So that was good. And if the game would have continued, I brought these air units down here into Palau Island. I had a couple of transports with paratroopers, so I was either going to take back Hokkaido, or I was even going to maybe come down here and try to take, one of the money islands back that is worth a victory point. Like I think Sumatra is worth a victory point. So I had a few different plans, nothing that would have gotten Japan, completely back into the war, but a couple of things that maybe would have got a victory point or two here or there. Once Fighting Irish blockaded me, I, obviously was trying to break that blockade. I was building a bunch of ships on the production chart, carriers and battleships, and I was going to drop them all down on one turn because I can put 10 naval units down here, drop them all on one turn, plus use some of my planes from Tokyo to hopefully break the blockade. But I had a brain freeze by putting 3 subs down there one turn. He just killed them off with his, maritime air patrol. So at that point, I was just like, forget it. As soon as I dropped all those ships down, that might have been enough to take out this fleet here in Sea Zone 38. But then he also has this fleet over here on this in Sea Zone 56. He would have just combined those together before I could actually have attacked him on the next turn, and he would have wiped me out. So I decided to not even try to break the blockade at that point. And that was pretty much it for Japan, just basically holding on, and that's it. One thing I wanted to cover, and I talked about this earlier, I think, it might even have been on the turn when I brought Japan into the war, and that is the whole aircraft carrier rule. And I just wanted to talk real quick about what I would propose. Not that I'm a big fan of house rules, but just something that makes maybe a little bit more sense. So I've set out these 4 carriers here. So in the game, the carriers are basically on constant, air patrol, so to speak, flying, around the carrier, protecting the carrier, whatever the case may be. So when, let's say, this fleet of 4 carriers wants to come out from Sea Zone 56, they can go 4 spaces because of the major naval port, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we want to attack Hawaii. Well, you can't attack Hawaii, at least with these planes on these 4 carriers, because they are flying alongside of the carriers the whole time the carriers are moving to, in this case, let's say Hawaii. So it would take a second turn, the following turn, to then be able to attack Hawaii with those air units. To me, that makes no sense. Again, the very name of this unit is an aircraft carrier, meaning you're carrying planes. And if you want to launch an attack on someone using air power, why would you have your aircraft flying from the departure to the target, but then once you get to the target, you have no movement space left for your planes? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So now I get the whole purpose of having aircraft on patrol for the carriers. But if you think back to when I attacked the South Pacific down here, Japan wasn't at war with anybody. They weren't even at war with the Chinese. So why would the Japanese even have any planes on any kind of patrol when they're not at war with anybody? They wouldn't even have elected to have planes on patrol of their carriers because they're not at war with anyone. They're initiating war on that turn. So they would have wanted the planes in position to be able to attack, not run out of fuel and not be in a position to attack. So my proposal would be to, much like with naval screening forces and designating certain ships as a screening force and then, certain ships as part of the amphibious landing, and so on and so forth. What you could do is designate carriers both as actual carriers for the planes and then other carriers as having the planes on patrol. So for like instance, if we had these 4 carriers here, I would designate, just for argument's sake, these 2 carriers would be flying patrol. So the planes on these 2 carriers are flying in protection of the carriers. These 2 carriers are actually carrying the 3 planes as cargo, much like naval transports do. So in that case, again, if we attacked Hawaii with these 4 carriers, these 2 wouldn't be able to use their planes because they were flying protection. But these 3 fighters that were carried as cargo, once they get to C-Zone 68 in Hawaii, they can now launch their planes and attack the Hawaiian Islands. Now, if you want to say that planes shouldn't have their full force space movement coming off a carrier, then fine, let's say 2. I think that makes sense that you could limit them to, say, a movement of 2, which means they can be transported to the attack site, then launch the planes, and then have the movement to get back, which is completely realistic in how things actually were in the Pacific. You wouldn't, you wouldn't use your planes flying around for, potentially hundreds of miles before you get to the target, and then you get to the target and now they can't participate in the attack. So I just think that makes, maybe more sense. So then the consequences of that would be if, again, let's say that was the case. So now let's say that the U.S. came, or, the British, whoever, came and attacked this fleet. Well, these 3 planes were cargo. So now if the U.S. attacks this fleet, these 3 fighters do not get to defend the carriers because they're being carried on the plane or carried on the carriers as cargo. The only 2 fighters that would be able to participate in defense are the 2 that you had designated as being on air patrol, so to speak. And again, it would be much like naval transports. If a naval transport is somewhere here in the Pacific, it's carrying, let's say, a tank and a man, and is attacked, then the tank and the man go down as cargo with the transport, and it would be the same thing here. If this fleet was attacked and let's say it was wiped out, then these 3 fighters would go down with the carriers without a defense because they were being transported as cargo. So that's just my 2 cents for maybe a little bit of a modification for carriers. That should be about it. I'm going to be tearing this game down and setting up a new one. We already have a new YouTube war ready to begin. It's going to be Operation No Time to Die. So I encourage you guys to stay tuned and watch that. We've got several good players. Madman Dan, I believe, is going to be the US and KMT. Templar Knight is going to be the Comintern. Bruce is going to be the Japanese, and Global War 36 enthusiast is going to be the UK and France, and I am going to take on the role of Germany and Italy. So I have a partner with me this time. So Bruce and I are going to have our pre-war conference tonight. Hopefully, I'll be kicking things off tomorrow morning with Germany Turn 1 in Operation No Time to Die. So hopefully you guys will be watching that. And that should be about it. Again, I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Keep the comments coming, even the constructive criticism. I feel like I've learned a lot. This was really the first time I had played Global War 36 version 3. All of my experience, it came on Global War 39, really, for the most part. So it was definitely a learning experience. Think I did decent. Definitely some room for improvement. And hopefully I'll take the lessons learned here to make a better showing in No Time to Die. So hopefully we'll see you guys tomorrow morning with Germany Turn 1, Operation No Time to Die.